Hi, it's Nick from the podcast. We don't usually have advertising here on Moderate Fantasy Violence, but we do make an exception for ourselves. So yep, my newest comic, StoneCop, is up now on Kickstarter. It's a story about, well, a cop made of stone bashing other rock monsters by me and the artist Phil Apley. So if that sounds exciting to you, then you can find the link in the show notes for this episode or on any of my social medias. Or if you type kickstarter.nickbryan.com into your browser, I think it should go straight there. Any of those things. There will be another plug at the end of the episode. But yes, back StoneCop. Enjoy this episode of the podcast. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be having space adventures with a retro pop music soundtrack in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and then training to be a stunt artist against the wishes of our family in polite society. But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Still in the space adventure genre, but maybe in a slightly bleaker end of it, I've been reading the comic book series Brink, which is a serial that was originally part of 2000 AD in like 5-page chunks and is now been collected in a series of graphic novels, which I am currently reading my way through after getting them in a humble bundle a few years ago, I think. It's by Dan Abnett and INJ Coolbard, and it's basically a sort of space horror sci-fi story about a detective in a post-apocalyptic space station, I guess, or an arc space station, I guess they call it, a world in which the Earth has been thoroughly fucked and humanity now lives in these like massive space stations owned by corporations, and things are starting to get a bit weird and people are saying strange words that make them throw up and doing sacrifices, and things are being heard behind the walls and people are doing increasingly bleak shit in the name of honouring these strange words that are sort of mimetically evil or something. So yeah, it's a sort of quite Lovecraftian, but certainly that sort of slightly cosmic feeling space horror.
Yeah, I was going to say, it definitely sounds Lovecraftian. Madness and things that are sort of beyond understanding creeping into the rational world.
Yeah, it's sort of that, yeah. There's a lot of strange-sounding god names and words in unearthly tongues, which people are sort of speaking and then losing their minds and then stabbing each other. And the lead detective, Curtis, is meant to be investigating sect crime, which apparently is a growing problem across the ship. There's 5 volumes of Brink. I'm about halfway through the 3rd one right now. And yeah, it's really, really good. Strong police procedural action. It is like, what if a fairly straight police procedural happened, except the crime being investigated was weird Lovecraftian stuff.
Yeah, I guess we've talked before about how the thing about the police procedural is that it can be applied to like any setting, you know, past, present, future, in order just to create a kind of accessible plot structure or sort of accessible template. So is it sort of a crime of the issue type format?
It's a crime of the book, I guess. As I say, it was originally serialised in 2000 AD in like 5-page chunks. So each of the like graphic novels are collecting about 18, 19 of these chunks, I think, to make like 100-ish page book. Obviously, it's quite modular. Like, they haven't aggressively marked out the chapter breaks in these books, but, you know, you can see that there's clearly a stop every 5 pages, like cliffhanger or change of scene or something. Like, you know, like when you're watching an American TV show and every so often it fades to black and then fades back in, and you know, that's one of their American commercial breaks.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I suppose that helps gives it real pace and things like that if they're dropping like a plot twist or a moment of suspension every like 5 pages.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, it's like people always say about British writers. People always talk about how that's why British writers did so well when they burst through to America in the 80s, and with people who everyone always mentions like Gaiman and Moore and Morrison. A lot of them had got started on 2000 AD and other similar short anthology comics where you really have to pack in your ideas and your concepts and have something major happen every few pages or possibly every few panels, and you can't, dick around. And that level of distilled concepts was quite new and exciting and innovative at the time to the American audience, and it still very much works. 2000 AD, still going.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and this is when were these originally published?
These are relatively recent, I think. I think these are late 2010s up to the present day. I think the last volume came out a couple of years ago. I don't actually know if 5 volumes is it, to be honest. I've sort of, because I'm still reading it, I haven't started like aggressively Googling it. So I'm not entirely sure if I've actually got the whole story or not. But, 5 volumes is enough for me to get going.
Yeah, you don't want to see any spoilers.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's quite acclaimed, Blink. It's one of the reasons I bought that humble bundle. It's one of the, I think, most talked up 2000 AD serials of the last few years.
Does sound like a really interesting concept and setting. and things like that. Yeah, pretty dark.
It's quite sedate, I guess. Is that the word? Yeah, by 2000 AD standards, or at least quite low-key. Like a lot of 2000 AD comics, obviously 2000 AD best known for Judge Dredd. And the whole point of Judge Dredd is, although yes, it's a satire of police brutality and authoritarianism, it's also about, a cool dude on a big motorbike who just pulls up and bashes you loads. Quite easy to get a cool image out of it. And whereas Brink, yeah, it's a lot more low-key, often in the 5-page chunks. The main thing that might happen is someone will have an ominous chat.
I guess, though, but in the volume itself, it'll work well in contrast with things like Judge Dredd. I mean, every comic can't be Judge Dredd, or else that's just going to be, or every sort of story segment, because that's just going to be an overload of one tone and one approach. They need to balance each other. So yeah, after you've read a few pages of someone getting twatted quite bloodily, something that's a bit more, I don't know, slow burn, horror, kind of pitched at a different tenor is kind of what you want.
I guess in the context of the 2000 AD magazine, you're reading, it's a sort of rise and fall. Brink is probably a welcome change of pace, because they have got quite a lot of strips, which are maybe in more of the Judge Dredd mould, where there's lots of big monstrous dudes, and it's important that there's a big splashy fight every few pages.
Yeah.
So, yeah, something like Brink probably works quite well as a palate cleanser, to be honest. Once you've read Brink, you're probably ready for the next massive twatting dude.
Yeah. Exactly. That's the skill of being a good editor stroke programmer, knowing kind of what goes well together, what complements each other, what obviously is just jarring as a change.
Oh yeah, but obviously I'm not reading it in the magazine, but yeah, it also works quite well as a whole graphic novel. Yeah, the 5-page chunks do weave together quite nicely. It's not particularly bitty or anything.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah, no, good series. I haven't read, I must admit, a huge amount of 2000 AD stuff. I'm a bad British comics person. But yeah, every so often I dip into it, and this is good stuff. So anyway, that's me. Alistair, what have you done?
So I've been watching a show from a couple of years ago, which is The Underground Railroad, based on a novel of the same name, which is a sort of magical realism stroke fantasy set in the antebellum South in America. Yeah, during the period of slavery, it begins in Georgia, and the plot of the show sort of loosely follows, it's got sort of quite meandering bits, flashbacks and things like that. Yeah, but it sort of loosely follows the story of Cora, who's a runaway slave. But yeah, in this world, the twist is that the network to smuggle people from the slavery-ridden South into the North, in this, is a literal underground train that, runs beneath the surface of America. And that's kind of the sort of extent of the fantastical elements of the story. The rest of it is going for historical realism as a tone. It does have this one kind of fantastical element to it. The show got a lot of attention when it came out, partly because of its completely unflinching and very brutal depiction of slavery. Yeah, there's a lot of people being flogged, variously abused, killed, things like that. It's not sanitizing the past. Certainly, I think the brutality of the slavery system is an accurate reflection. The only thing is, in order to travel from state to state, they go through, they have to go to certain places where they can pick up a train, climb down this sort of shaft into this kind of lower world where this mysterious train comes along and pulls them through a dark tunnel. I mean, this show has got a very premium drama with its faithful recreation of the style of the past, big cast, lots of location shooting, clearly lots of money spent on it. But for that, it's also got a quite modular structure in that each episode is kind of one state and things like that, and usually ends with the train taking them to the next state on their journey north. So yeah, it's kind of, I think it's partly a way to sort of just have them, the train drops them in one place. They experience what the experience of slavery or being black in that state is. Something usually horrific happens, then they get on the train and go to the next state.
Yeah, I was going to say, so different state, but obviously the same characters, because much like Snowpiercer, it's set on a train.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Well, the train kind of appears usually at the beginning and the end of each episode.
Yeah.
The main antagonist, who is absolutely terrifying, played by Joel Edgerton, who's a slave hunter. Obviously, there's also the plot line following him as he's trying to find the escaped slave and track down the existence of this railway. And I must say, it's got a really strong cast, loads of great people of colour acting in it, obviously, especially William Jackson Harper, who everyone loved as Chidi in The Good Place. But yeah, I must say, special praise for Joel Edgerton as the absolutely terrifying villain.
I'm assuming this is a more straight, dramatic performance by William Jackson Harper here.
Yes, very much. It's much closer, in fact, to his work in Midsommar, in which he does a sort of, he does creepy quite well. It's interesting that probably most people know him for one iconic role, which I suppose happens to a lot of people who have a sitcom or something that really blows up. But he does a lot of dramatic acting, and he does this sort of ranger character who finds escaped slaves and protects them very well. He's got a real simmering presence.
Well, there is a lot of actors recently who, come up in comedy and then hop over to drama. So I guess it's about time someone did the opposite.
Yeah, like say strong cast. Will Poulter as well has a good episode about him. Chase Dillon also playing a child called Homer. He's very good as well. Usually, yeah, child actors can be really hit and miss, but actually I must say he's pretty good in this.
I swear to God, every time you mention child actors, it's to say they're usually bad, but this one's good.
I guess that's to be yeah, I don't know. I don't watch a lot of kids' TV, I suppose.
I guess we just don't mention them when they're bad because we feel bad bullying children.
Yeah, it's a very much man bites dog situation. Yeah, I mean, I'd recommend this show if you're interested in history. I mean, I'd recommend it certainly if you're interested in like how you can like weave a fantasy element into a historic or contemporary plot in order to illuminate, you know, kind of what's going on. I mean, it's kind of academic what the difference between fantasy and magical realism is. I would kind of say in magical realism, the fantastical element isn't explored. It's just kind of there to move plot. And in this, I haven't quite got to the end yet because it's a pretty hard going show, but I don't think they're going to explain where the railway came from or who made it or whatever. It's just kind of there.
When you say the railway's just kind of there, there's not like a plot line about, you know, mechanics maintaining and building the railway. It's literally a magic railway that appears.
Yeah. Every so often they go down a sort of a hole, and then there's a station in a big cave, and then this train comes along with a sort of quite philosophical black man who's driving it.
Certainly sounds like something you get in a magical realist novel. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, and obviously the Joel Edgerton character is kind of hunting for this, or he keeps saying like slaves keep escaping, and where do they go? They just like vanish into thin air. So he's trying to work out the answer to this question on some level, as well as, you know, retrieve the slave that he's been tasked to bring back. It's not kind of really like, I don't know if they reveal like who built it, why is this network there, like where does the coal come from? If these are the sort of questions that really bother you, I think it's not really the tone the show's aimed at.
It's interesting because I guess I sense there's a certain reluctance to bring these sort of issues too far into like magical or sci-fi stories, but I guess if you're doing it in a sort of literary fiction, it's not like a magical world building system. It's more of a metaphor type device, then I guess you might get away with it.
Yeah, it's very much that sort of thing. It might be what people like rather sort of snottily describe as like, oh, it's speculative fiction, it's not science fiction.
Speculating upon the possibility of a magic train.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. How would a magic train affect things? A lot of people say, like, you know, Margaret Atwood's not science fiction, including Margaret Atwood herself claims she never wrote science fiction, she wrote speculative fiction. There's a great article by Ursula K. Le Guin, which pretty much says, no, The Handmaid's Tale is science fiction and stop being a snob, which is obviously said in a much more erudite way because it's Ursula K. Le Guin and she's great with words. Certainly, I mean, in geek spheres, like, you know, geek Twitter, I saw a lot of people tweeting about this show when it came out a few years ago. I'm a bit behind the times on that. I guess, I mean, it does have like a strong overlap with kind of themes of social justice, racial justice, kind of the history of slavery that I guess appeal to our set of sort of geeky Twitter. So there's definitely a crossover there.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few novels with quite genre concepts that I think were nonetheless seen as being, you know, at the more literary end, but seem to be often being adapted. Like there was Station 11, which I've actually read the novel of, but not seen the show. That was a good book. And The Power, which I have not consumed in any way.
Yeah, which is also just on Amazon Prime, where I'm watching Underground Railroad. And it's part of these things like how, certainly in books, we're not sticking to our silos in terms of genre anymore. People read much more cross-genre. Why it leads to books that can be packaged, or like their design, like cover and art and things like that, are made so they can be shelved in either, you know, general fiction, literary fiction, or science fiction. N.K. Jemisin's novels are like that. Becky Chambers' novels are like that. The Book of the Underground Railroad's like that. You know, it's up to you what your bookshop is if you want to put this. You know, it sits quite well on shelves next to kind of actual historical novels about slavery, or what it can also equally be shelved in science fiction / fantasy.
Yeah, I guess you could argue that it's a way of consuming this stuff without saying you're consuming sci-fi fantasy, but I think the difference is blurring a bit.
Yeah. But I'd recommend this, yeah, with the caveat that there is a lot of violence, which was, you know, obviously very historically accurate, but it's not by any means an easy show. I kind of have to limit myself to usually one episode a night, and sometimes even breaks between over different days, because it is just like, it's very tense, it's very well made. I mean, it's very good, but it's not an easy thing to watch.
Okay, and first up today, our second big Marvel Cinematic Universe film of the year. It's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, the conclusion of writer-director James Gunn's action-comedy sci-fi trilogy. This time, the lovable misfits of the Guardians of the Galaxy find themselves on a medical mission when Rocket is severely injured by the attack of a new villain who was set up at the very, very end of Volume 2. And then they discover that after Rocket was created in the lab of a mysterious villain called the High Evolutionary, he also installed a kill switch on him because he's technically proprietary technology, and the Guardians must now go and confront the High Evolutionary to get him to turn off the kill switch so they can actually treat Rocket's mortal wounds. And yes, they must journey into Rocket's past, uncover his trauma, and this being Guardians of the Galaxy, also share a lot about their own trauma and move past it as a found family and such. Yep, we've seen this long-awaited trilogy concluder. Alistair, what did you think?
So yeah, this has got everything you want from a Guardians of the Galaxy movie, which kind of has its own brand, I guess, within the MCU, but they are quite similar. Yeah, it's funny, it's got nice character bits, you have the found family vibe, as you just alluded to. It's got all the great needle drops, which I'm sure we'll come on to in more detail, but I guess the real strength of this film is how it makes you actually deeply care for a talking raccoon and gets you really emotionally invested in his story. I guess it's been built up across several previous films, but it is genuinely moving. Yeah, the story of Rocket and how he's been treated, manipulated, abused by his creator is very sweet and touching in moments. And it's a real feat that they managed to do this for a non-human character.
Yeah, no, it's definitely the conclusion of a couple of films worth of build-up, but they do really commit to this whole, okay, we're going to do Rocket's backstory. And yeah, it's quite harrowing at times. Like, if you're aggressively triggered by animal abuse or animal experimentation, then dear God, do not watch this film. But yeah, they do commit to it, and they do allow us to see the full horror of it and feel Rocket's pain, and that in turn rebounds back to the broader sense of how nice the love and empathy he's found with the Guardians of the Galaxy is. And yeah, it's a fun film. It leans very hard on the sort of strong, positive found family emotions. It maybe isn't quite as wacky and zany as some of the previous films. They don't go quite as much for the silly comedy, and on the occasions where they do sort of stop the quite serious, we've got to deal with this serious trauma stuff to do some zany comedy, at times it almost feels slightly odd and out of place, which to be fair they do sort of address, but still, it's sometimes odd to the point of being jarring. But as someone who's okay with extreme tonal whiplash in his fiction, I didn't personally hugely mind, and I thought this was quite a nice sort of strong, straightforward finale. I thought number 2 in this series, volume 2 I guess, felt at times a bit rambling, but this, despite being longer, actually I thought felt a bit more tight and straightforward.
Yeah, it's definitely more cohesive. It's improved by focusing on a kind of core story, putting kind of Rocket more at the centre of the film than Star-Lord stroke Peter Quill, let's see, from the previous films. Yeah, I agree with you when you say that there's definitely less humour in this. I mean, I think what made Guardians of the Galaxy, especially the original one, stand out amongst the MCU when the tone had kind of been established was that it really did bring, like, the humour. Like, there was a really high density of jokes, including, for example, like, big jokes in the final action sequence where, Marvel films usually get quite serious. And, it's definitely a step beyond just Iron Man, which is basically an action movie just with the odd, like, witty quip or kind of sarcastic comment. But yeah, this is definitely dialing it down to a more normal level of normal Marvel density of jokes. There are definitely scenes when they went for sincere emotion in this, when I kind of thought in one of the previous Guardians films they might have gone for a joke at this point, subverting the sincere emotion.
Well, yeah, and there are a couple of points where Mantis and Drax, who are, to be honest, the main people being lent on for comedy here, because everyone else is quite busy being either serious or sad, basically nearly ruin the entire mission because they're dicking around doing some Guardians comedy. And Nebula yells at them for it, and then they sort of have it out about the importance of taking things seriously and whether it's okay to not be incredibly serious. Which is kind of interesting, only because it's the two tones of this film basically yelling at each other on screen.
Yeah.
And the ending of that is kind of bittersweet, to be honest. Yeah, it's in some ways quite a strange film, but it does take itself seriously, and I'm, I guess, invested in these characters enough to be okay with that. If you just turn up to these films for a laugh, and you sit down thinking, right, time for another Guardians of the Galaxy laugh, then yeah, you may be disappointed.
Yeah, I hope that the sincere emotion carries you through. I mean, yeah, like I say, they're concluding the Guardians series, and you're kind of like paying off a lot of character things that have been set up. Pretty much like all the characters kind of get some kind of payoff at one point, or like a plot or character arc that resolves their personal drama, and there's a lot of characters in this, which is quite impressively done. So yeah, the fact that they're sincerely paying off all these emotional beats in a quite powerful way, hopefully is what means people get a sort of fulfilling experience from this film. And obviously there's all this great style, like phenomenal soundtrack with lots of 80s needle drops. But yeah, I guess if you just want comedy sort of larking around, then I suppose this is a slightly different tone.
I mean, Guardians 2, although it did have a lot of good comedy in it, is perhaps best known for its massive tear-jerking moments at the end. And maybe retrospectively that was a turning point, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things, you want, which is you need, I think, some element of strong emotion. Like, so a plot arc that pays off. You know, even in the most silly comedy movies, it's one of the reasons why they don't make feature-length sketch shows and put them in the cinema. Or, you know, it rarely happens, because when you're in the cinema, you want a kind of narrative and emotional arc to like carry you through the whole thing, which they did very well in the second one, despite it kind of meanders in the middle. But in this one, yeah, they got the kind of emotional arc really nailed.
Well, yeah, and I think, as you say, it does do a good job of feeling like a conclusion to the whole thing. In a slightly more low-key way, like, they're not trying to compete with, you know, Avengers Endgame in terms of scale. They're not going batshit. There isn't a threat to the whole universe or anything. It is very much just about the threat to, you know, Rocket and a bunch of imprisoned animals.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think that's more in keeping with, you know, the Guardians of the Galaxy stuff. Like, a lot of their stories have always been about their personal histories and their personal struggles. And ending on those terms is probably the right thing to do, you know. They can hang around on the sidelines of the Avengers stuff, but ironically, despite being the cosmic space heroes, they're just a few losers in a spaceship. It makes more sense to work like that.
Yeah. And also, I think suits the dramatic structure of the film, rather than ending, say, like one of the big Avengers films that ends with like these enormous fights with like gazillions of mechanized enemy, or like an army of aliens invading a planet with a huge spectacle. This one, you know, it comes down to, you know, a conflict between the core characters at the end. Like, I'll say this as tactfully as I can, but I guess potential spoilers, you've been warned. The final like action scene is just like a straight up fight between, you know, the villain, the High Evolutionary, and the Guardians of the Galaxy. There's no armies of goons. You know, there's not like a huge spectacle element to it. I mean, it's impressive, but it's more similar to, as we talked, you know, something like Die Hard, when at the end it comes down to just, you know, John McClane confronting Hans Gruber. In this, yeah, it comes down to just Rocket finally confronting his creator and Rocket being backed up by his friends. And it's kind of spectacally a lower tone than a Avengers film, but I think it works by focusing in on that character conflict at the end.
Well, yeah, I think there is a good level of action. I mean, to give Marvel whatever credit they may deserve, they have, I think, dialed a bit down on their films just ending with 20 minutes of indiscriminate slap, bang, thud, where you just sort of stare at the pixels slapping together and go, God, I really hope there's some more characterization soon.
Yes, we've all learned the follies from that, partly from watching any Transformers movies.
Yeah, you know, Marvel films are a bit better for that than they used to be, and yeah, the action at the end of this one does feel like it's actually a directed story, rather than just a bit in the script where James Gunn has written, insert action here, I guess. And yeah, and it works well narratively. It usually goes along with the normal sort of Guardians beats. There's normally a sort of fun comic twist or an unexpected payoff to the action, which works with the general vibe. And it all looks good, you know, having, again... peed a bit on Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania for far too much of the film, looking like a bunch of actors standing in front of a photo backdrop. Yeah, this film looks pretty good for the most part. This film looks like they're actually standing on real sets. Maybe they even are.
Yeah, and the production design is phenomenal. Yeah, I do want to say that, yeah, everything looks brilliant. You know, yeah, the really design elements really sing. Possibly my favourite bit is, I guess, kind of about a third into the film. There's this, like, they visit this space station that's all, like, organic, and it's, like, everything's biological, and they've really done a good job of making it look really weird, like you're inside, like, a big psychedelic coloured creature, and, like, all the security people are these sort of blobby and blobby is really the only best way to describe it, kind of foam suit things to make them look kind of like white blood cells, and they sort of float around, and there's lots of goo and colours, bright colours and stuff. It's absolutely, yeah, it's really, like, really beautifully designed. It kind of really thought about it. It really struck me as the sort of thing you'd find in a Ian M. Banks novel. Loads of imagination has gone into realising this world and making it look very strange. So yeah, so I very much appreciated that.
Yeah, no, like, there's only actually a few locations in this film. Yeah, as I say, it's quite a directed story. They basically go to, like, 3 or 4 places, and that's the story. But yeah, they do make an effort to make each one feel distinct and put some conceptual thought into how it actually works.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, and a lot of beautiful designs. So yeah, hats off to the art team on this one.
So yeah, if we're in, where does this fit in the general Marvel narrative? I guess it qualifies as a return to form. To be honest, it almost feels kind of, is retro the right word? Kind of throwbacky, or, well, like, to be honest, like it should have come out about 4 years ago, which it probably should have.
Yes, it's been delayed for various reasons, you know, partly to make the Suicide Squad.
Well, yeah, if not for various bits of behind-the-scenes James Gunn drama and then COVID, I suspect we'd have had this film a while ago, and it would have felt in keeping with that. Like, this does not feel like part of the current Marvel phase. It feels like a long-delayed sequel to the events of Guardians 2 and Endgame. game.
Well, to contrast it to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, this one is completely paying off and wrapping things up, whereas that one is throwing things out and opening up new possibilities. Which, this is a more satisfying experience.
Well, it's pretty self-contained. Like, there's nothing in this that isn't either introduced and paid off within this, or something that was in Guardians 2, or, I guess, Endgame in one case.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, in terms of just quality of film, I just felt this, it's firing on all cylinders much more. It's the humour's in the right place, the emotion's in the right place, the character arcs work well, every character's got their role, they don't just seem to disappear for no reason. That said, I actually slightly feel that the Quill and Gamora story is kind of left hanging a bit. I preferred that to be kind of more, conclusively wrapped up. I like the fact they didn't just reset it to, where it was at the end of the first film, where you think it might go, with them being a couple, but I felt it was left hanging a bit.
A little. I mean, I think there's a certain air of awareness of what people expect, which is, to go for them to fall in love all over again, and, I don't know, anti-spoilers, I guess. That does not happen. But whether you're satisfied with what they did instead is up to you.
Yeah, but that was certainly a subversion, that they didn't go down the characters falling in love direction. Yeah, so that was unexpected.
Yeah, but I have no idea whether James Gunn was, fully aware and down with the whole Gamora dying in a different film thing. I mean, obviously, Gamora was always Thanos' daughter. Thanos is in the first Guardians film. Her being strongly tied into the Thanos arc, which was always going to end in those Avengers films, was probably not a surprise to James Gunn or anyone working on the film. So maybe that was planned all along. Who knows? Certainly not me.
Yeah, there's lots of interesting political elements also almost this film. It's definitely, almost a polemic against animal testing. I mean, it really shows that, the cruelty that human beings and whatever do to animals, and there's a lot of a plea to treat animals like we treat each other, which is I thought was sort of subtly woven into the film.
Oh yeah, and the High Evolutionary in general, who by the way is a very good villain. I like the fact that although they don't break their backs try to make him, have a valid point and be in any way sympathetic, he is given, a motivation. He's not just a cardboard nothing.
Yeah, he's not just like Steppenwolf was in the Justice League film, or at least the original cut, just kind of evil for evil's sake, more like a Power Rangers villain. He's a megalomaniac trying to create the perfect world.
A massive eugenics twat.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean, kind of, the audience is picking up the things they need to know that, to be fair, there's a bit when he, blows up a whole planet, so it's this proper, villain move. But yeah, the audience is filling in, the fact that, he believes in, superior life forms, and he believes in, just experimenting on creatures he considers inferior, cutting them open, doing medical experiments on them, torturing them, keeping them in cages. The audience is filling in the background, the parallels with our world and things they may or may not like about, medical technology. It's interesting that, he runs a big science technology corporation. Again, parallels to our world there, where he's, profiting on all these, nasty experiments that he's doing.
Yeah, I'm sure the High Evolutionary's vague, I'm going to make the world perfect, which just happens to be the way I want it. Eugenic stuff, you could probably draw all the parallels you want to people you don't like in the real world. But he's a strong enough villainous presence in this film to not just feel like nothing whatsoever, but also, this is the Guardians' big finale. The focus is not on the villain.
And he kind of just relates to the character arc anyway, in that he's Rocket Raccoon's creator. And there is a theme, I think, the theme of parenthood runs throughout the Guardians film. The first one is about Peter Quill's mother. The second one is about Peter Quill's father. This one's about, Rocket Raccoon's father. As we mentioned, the Thanos being Gamora's father is a major element to these films, and also the Nebula character's father. There's finding families. There's the theme of finding a family, amongst people. There's Drax also, who's lost his family. So yeah, and he was a father and isn't anymore, and sort of becomes a father again in this film in a sort of roundabout way. So definitely one of the themes they're exploring, which is a common one in a lot of science fiction, is creation myths, fatherhood or parenthood is one of the big themes.
Yeah, there's definitely strong parental issues vibes in these films, which is, it's a classic psychological theme, and it's one of the reasons why these films resonate, I guess. And again, coming back to the classic and well-used theme of space-based found family. When your actual family doesn't work out, at least you've got your buddies in your spaceship.
Yeah, and to drive the point home, they've even got Nathan Fillion from Firefly in this film.
Yeah, a weird bit part, but he is there.
He is there. How much more found family can you need?
Okay, and last up today, we are going to talk about Polite Society, an action comedy that's just come out, directed and written by Nida Manzoor, who also made We Are Lady Parts, a comedy from a year or two back, which we very much enjoyed. This one is about the teenager Via Khan, who dreams of becoming a stuntwoman and becoming a successful artistic professional along with her sister, who is, she thinks, going to become an artist, until her sister seems to abandon her artistic dreams in order to marry some man she's just met. And Via, as her dreams begin to drop away from beneath her, finds herself going on a quest to try and make them still happen. We've seen this film. Alistair, what did you think of it?
Really nice. I mean, again, similar to Guardians in that it's got humour, it's got good action in it, in a sort of low-key British way, but it's still good. You know, there's a really sweet story about family at its core, which is good. What I really liked about this is really picking up, I think, the visual style originally laid down by Spaced, and that Edgar Wright then picked up for, his Cornetto trilogy and Scott Pilgrim and other things. This is the first time I've seen something really from outside the Edgar Wright, Simon Pegg, Nick Frost artistic circle, someone really picking up that style and running with it and applying it to something slightly different. I haven't dug into it in lots of detail if there are connections, I don't know, certainly in like production or department or the producers, but yeah, it is nice. I really thought that Spaced had that very distinctive visual style, and it really works for turning like a low-key British setting into like something that kind of looks like a Hollywood action movie, and it works really well here.
Yeah, I mean, that's the obvious connection for me as someone who's seen a lot of Edgar Wright films and also read Scott Pilgrim when I was 19, 20, and yeah, it's very Edgar Wright, it's very Scott Pilgrim. It's very funny as well, in a like very straight sitcom way. I mean, Nida Manzoor also made We Are Lady Parts, which was also very funny, but yeah, the comedy here is like metronomic. There's a decent laugh in basically every scene, and they almost all come off. And a lot of credit here goes to the lead actor Priya Kanzara, who I think is great in this, making this character journey work, in that her character goes on this ridiculous, to an extent obviously misguided quest, but it still remains thoroughly sympathetic throughout, even when she's doing stupid or flat out unsympathetic things. It's a very good portrayal of a sort of a teenager, in that you understand that they're doing a lot of what they're doing because they're scared or they're angry, and it's probably not a good thing to do or even a particularly sympathetic thing to do, but you kind of understand why they're doing it, but kept reliably on her side throughout, no matter what stupid things she's doing. And thanks to the sort of genre conventions of this film, she does get to do some pretty stupid things. Yeah.
I mean, the sister relationship is kind of the core of this film. They're really sweet vibes, and it's nice to hear the heart of the film is a sibling relationship, rather than being like putting a romantic relationship at the heart of the film, although there is like obviously a romance element to this. Yeah, you kind of completely believe in the two sisters and their relationship, their kind of fractiousness. They don't always get along, but they've got this bond, and that's kind of the core of the film. It means it's got a lot of heart. It's quite sweet.
I guess we're sort of mostly talking about the heart and the relationships and the sort of teenage element of it, because honestly a lot of the fun of Polite Society is seeing how far it actually goes in its genres, and you don't want to spoil that too much. But yeah, there's also a lot of good action. The fight scenes in this when they come are extremely enjoyable.
Yeah, it's really got the sort of energy of like a big budget Hollywood action movie. They keep the fight scenes coming. They're spectacular. There's a lot of great stunt work, ironically, suitably probably I should say, for a film that's about someone who wants to be a stunt woman. There's lots of excellent stunts going on. But yeah, this also adds to the comedy in a sort of quite silly way, in that there's epic fight scenes, but like taking place in the hallway of a suburban terraced house in London, or in a school gymnasium and things like that. And again, it's got that hot fuzz sense of humour of like the very mundanely British with the kind of high octane Hollywood thrown in.
Yeah, it gets to successfully have its cake and eat it, in that the joke is that they're filming these quite mundane things in this quite sort of dynamic Hollywood way, but also the action scenes are genuinely quite good and quite exciting. And if you can pull that off, which they do, then excellent.
Yeah, and it's a tight 90-minute film, which is obviously very good. And it's got tight humour, it's got tight action, it's got tight characterization. It's a relatively large cast of characters for this kind of film that's both short in scope and length. There's the family, there's the whole family of the other family that the sister's marrying into. The main character has kind of a friendship group. She's got like two core friends, and there's lots of characters in her school. So yeah, there's and everyone kind of gets their moment, and in even this like 90-minute film. I think that's partly because it's got quite a lot of narrative structural devices kind of layered over it. The film's divided into chapters. Each of the major fight sequences has a big bit when it comes up with like Khan versus Khan when she fights her sister, or Khan versus her schoolfriend's name in an early one. There's also this structural device of her writing emails to this famous stunt woman that she wants to apprentice with, but the email she's just kind of pouring out her thoughts about her relationship with her sister, which is also forming a kind of narrative device. And there's various bits when they have a plan to bring down the fiance of her sister, which is also structured around this 3-step plan. So there are a lot of like structural elements to the story, but it does give it a real sense of pacing, moving forward. Right, this is the bit we're on now, this is the bit we're on now. One of the reasons why it zips along, it doesn't feel like 90 minutes, even though 90 minutes is quite short for a film.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed, again, the sort of knowing artifice of it, which I guess, again, is a bit Edgarite. The sort of willingness to go, yeah, you are watching a film, here is the chapter heading, here are the on-screen character names, here's the fun devices. It's not the most naturalistic film in the world, but again, impressively, the characters still come through. So, Again, everybody wins.
Tarantino does that a lot as well, which is linking back to Hollywood, and obviously Tarantino's being influenced and Spaced, and Edgar Wright and things like that, and obviously, a lot of the both comics and older Hollywood action movies that influenced Tarantino also influenced like the Spaced people as well. So this film is sort of in dialogue with a kind of long history of pulpy pop culture of kind of action and sort of action stories.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's cultural references in there we're not getting, because this is obviously based quite heavily in sort of South Asian culture, and there's probably a lot of Bollywood references in here we're missing entirely, but because it's also grounded well enough in Western cinema to have the obvious Edgar Wright comparisons and so on, it still works fine.
Yeah, there's a Bollywood dance sort of sequence at one point. There's lots of music in it, again, similar to Guardians of the Galaxy. There's a lot of great needle drops, and I think a lot of them are either from Bollywood films or Pakistani pop music and things like that, or South Asian pop music. But yeah, I think what makes it interesting is like the style. Obviously you can make comparisons to Tarantino, you can make comparisons to Spaced, Edgar Wright, you can make comparisons to lots of things that are riffing on this pulpy pop culture history. That in itself isn't original, but what I've not seen before is it specifically applied to this South Asian community, certainly the British sort of Pakistani Muslim community. Applying it to that culture is what's new and innovative about this film. It's kind of using that as a way to unlock the characterization, the pressures of being a young British Pakistani woman. Your parents want you to get married. There's you've got cultural, social pressures. You're also trying to find your own way. You're possibly culturally, similar to, like, the main character has, like, one of her friends is sort of black Afro-Caribbean, one's white. Is she more similar to them, people who've all grown up in Britain versus older family members? These cultural and kind of specific elements are being mixed in with this dialogue with film and pop culture history, which is kind of what's really fresh about this film.
Well, yeah, it's also got the sort of YA coming-of-age story elements, which, again, I don't know, I was going to say, it's, again, make another Scott Pilgrim comparison, but I think that's more of a sort of early 20s slacker thing, to be honest.
Yeah, I suppose it's kind of like a youth. Yeah, this is definitely, as you say, a YA finding your own way in the world, which is a big theme of YA stuff. I mean, there's similarities between this and Ms. Marvel, which we covered on the podcast. I mean, again, partly because it's set in an American Pakistani community following a teenage girl who gets, in that one, literal superpowers. But both of them have this, there's a family around you with expectations. You're trying to find your own way, find out who you are in life, doing what you want to do. Those are all important themes.
Well, they both do a good job of treating the culture sort of matter-of-factly, don't they? They just drop you in and assume that because the main character, in both cases a teenage girl, is having quite relatable emotions, you'll probably work it out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it works well, partly because also in the long history of media, especially in Britain and America, being focused on like white people and their culture and things are like, and then everyone who's not white has basically got to pick it up and find the relatable elements to them in it. Now that's inversed. Kind of as a white person, you're watching a TV show or a film about what it's like to be a young, like, Pakistani girl or British Pakistani girl, but I'm still like, right, I'm relating to this aspect of like, it's about finding who you are, about wanting to express yourself against your parents' wishes, universal themes. And also this is kind of stuff, it's mixing in broader pop culture as well as the specific like references to things like Bollywood.
Yeah, this is the sort of thing I enjoy. I'm kind of feel like this should have made a bigger culty splash, to be honest. I haven't seen as much tweeting about this as there probably should be. I think, as I sort of hinted earlier, it seems to be quite a busy year for big sort of genre, brandy, action-y movies, and maybe it's getting a bit lost in the shuffle, I don't know. But it's a shame. Part of me feels like this should be this year's Everything Everywhere All at Once. Yeah,
despite the fact of being the current Little White Lies cover film, and there's a big tube advertising campaign, I do feel that it's possibly lost in the shuffle a bit, as you say, which is disappointing, because I think this is one of my favourite films of the year. I just really recommend it. It's tight, it's fun, it's it's hilarious, it's moving. I encourage everyone to go see it. I think it's just really well made. I think just like the team have just like, with British budgets, they've really like kind of made something that just looks great and is loads of fun to watch.
Yeah, no, fully endorse. Go find this if you can. I imagine this will be quite high on the end of year top 5, unless the rest of the year is amazing. Yeah. Because at the moment it's probably close to number 1.
Thanks for listening. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please leave us a review in your podcatcher of choice, as it helps others find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you've particularly enjoyed any of those experiences, then why not follow the show on social media, where we are Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook and MFV Podcast on Twitter. And you can also follow me on Twitter at NickMB, or go to my website at nickbryan.com, or Instagram at nickbryan.com, all written out, where I will be mostly talking about StoneCop, my new Kickstarter comic about a cop made of stone who has to protect his city from mountain trolls. But even if he survives the gravelly gauntlet of mountain trolls coming to bash him up, will he like the dark secret he finds in the mountains? That's StoneCop, launching on Kickstarter, well, in the future now, but it'll have been going for a couple of days by the time you hear this. I'll put a link in both the show notes and the website blurb, and probably on the relevant social medias I just mentioned as well. If you like comics, and particularly if you liked my comic The Catalyst from a few years back, if anyone read that, because we're back in sort of artificial being searching for purpose territory here. So yeah, if you like my comics, especially my comics about that, then please back. You might like it. Thank you.
Yep, and then I can endorse Nick's comics work. It's very good. I will be backing this, so I hope you do too. And if you want anything more from me while you're out there, you can follow me on Twitter, where I'm at Alistair J.R. Ball, or get more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us on the next issue of Moderate Fantasy Violence, when we will be discussing World Tree, a new comic from James Tynion and Fernando Blanco, and also the new Star Wars animated anthology show, Star Wars Visions, where we will be doing our classic anthology approach of counting down our favourite episodes from this new show. Join us then for all of that. Until then, have a good one, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.